Welcome back. I'm Gary McLeod, and I'm talking with James Howard Kunstler about a lot of things, but the most recent thing we've been talking about is The Long Emergency, his nonfiction book of an amazing range of criticism about how we're dealing with today's cultural problems in the West, certainly, and also
economic
around the world, and oil has sort of been our focal point. So I want to go back to what we were talking about. I mean, the long-term effects, where we are now, what you think about. I want to bring up the Afghanistan thing. I mean, in terms of like the budget, it always seems to me like the politicians and certain people, at least as far as we get from the news, really know how to spend money, but they only know a couple of ways of raising it. And some of those ways seem to be crooked, but I don't know. I'm just
well, that's a very, very large arena of discussion. I mean, but if you want to talk about our foreign policy adventures, I think that's fairly cut and dry. What we're seeing are the early rounds of a global contest over the remaining oil resources in the world. They are not equitably distributed around the world. They tend to be in certain places.
This book does really well at outlining that, I think. Very
thank you very much. But the Middle East and Central Asia happen to be two of the places in the world where most of the oil that remains is. And what you're going to see is a growing contest between the great powers of the world to control that oil, and it's underway. The United States, of course, imports more than 2/3 of the oil that we use. Our oil production peaked in 1970, a long time ago. And we were even importing oil back then, but now we're importing a lot more oil. We produced 10 million barrels a day in 1970. And back then we used about 13 million barrels a day.
I'm glad you pointed that out.
Now we use about 20 million barrels a day, and we only produce about 4.9 million barrels a day here. So, and we're continuing to deplete and run down. So, this is going to become an ever more pressing problem for us, and it's going to be expressed in a fairly desperate foreign policy.
I think Atlantic Monthly certainly made a great investment in publishing this book, The Long Emergency, and I encourage everybody to either get it online or go to your favorite bookstore. You can order things at bookstores. They may not have it on the shelf, but you can always ask them to get it.
And it's in paperback.
And it's in paperback.
Less expensive.
And it's yellow.
Yes.
I mean, you can't miss it. Now, the interesting thing to me as a writer, of course, is how you take all this information, which it tends to be overloaded in terms of what you can take in, unless you go to a disaster movie. I mean, they've made the leap to 2012 and everything's going to be underwater. But what happens between now and then, and how do you turn that into fiction, which you've done?
I did turn it into fiction, and I did it very deliberately for a couple of reasons. First of all, I've written about 15 books, and most recently, my books have been nonfiction. I wrote the books about suburbia and urban design, etc.
Well, you've really taken off with those books. I mean, it's resonated with where the culture is, too.
Well, it's a big concern to the culture because our society is suffering hugely from the tragic decisions that we made over the last 40, 50 years about the way we live in this country. So, people are really being punished by the suburban living arrangement. And now that we're seeing it fail, we're going to some interesting places with that. I wanted to do a couple of things. First of all, I do want to continue writing fiction because I enjoy doing it. But I also wanted to present our problems in a way that would be very tactile for an audience, in a way that they could really feel and sense what it would be like to live in a post-oil future in the United States. So I wrote a novel called World Made by Hand. It was published also by the Atlantic Monthly Press in 2008. It's set in upstate New York because this is a part of the country I know.
Well, it's also where all this is going to happen.
Well, it's going to happen all over the Western world. But in World Made by Hand, as the story begins, in a small town in Washington County, New York, up in a sweet little corner of the state, sort of wedged in between Vermont and Lake Champlain. And it's a small town, and the electricity is flickering out. And the internet's gone. An election has occurred, but we're not quite sure who's president and where he is because Washington has had a very bad terror incident. And so the story follows what happens to these characters in a small town over a 2-week period in the early summer of this future year. It involves a trip they make on a boat down to Albany on the Hudson River, where a hostage and ransom racket is being worked by the person who's become the political boss of Albany. The city of Albany has been reduced to a kind of a trading operation along the river. And all of the other stuff up the hill where the state of New York government was is all sort of gone. I mean, it's there, but it's empty.
The buildings are there.
At one point, my protagonist, Robert, goes up to the state capitol building to see what's left. And he encounters a building that is kind of fallen apart, that's been plundered, that, the winos and displaced people are living in. But he does find one official left. He finds the lieutenant governor rattling around in there like a BB in a packing crate, trying to pretend that there's something still going on.
Lieutenant governor.
And anyway, so it's kind of a ripping yarn because I wanted people to very vividly sense what it would be like to be in this world where the cars have all stopped and where we're not driving anymore and there's no more Walmart and agriculture has come back to the center of economic life and you don't get news from far away and you don't travel more than 20 miles except under extraordinary circumstances. And this one was published in 2008, and I just finished a sequel to it, which is now scheduled for publication in the fall of 2010. And it's the same people, the same cast of characters in the same town in upstate New York. Some of them are now in the background, and some of them who were in the background in the first one are now in the foreground. The second book, which is titled The Witch of Hebron, after a little town in Washington County, the story is about an 11-year-old boy who's the son of the town doctor who commits a crime and has to run away from home and town and falls into the company of a 19-year-old psychopathic killer and has some pretty frightening adventures and is the people in town are of course looking for him, including his father. And that's what's going on in the book. One of the other elements of the book that I brought in was that a group of religious Christian fundamentalists from the South have moved into town and bought the high school and set up shop as a kind of commune or utopian community within the town. And there's this oppositional situation going on between these evangelicals, led by a very colorful and humorous character called Brother Job. He's kind of a combination of Captain Ahab and Boss Hogg, and he's a comically dark character, and he runs the show, and he's increasingly trying to push the people in town around, and they don't like it too much.